Nancy, you want to start? Who are you?
Who am I? Oh, man. I'm Nancy. I'm the co-founder of RDMD along with Onno. And my background is in genetics research. So I worked in a lab all throughout college and then became a biotech investment banker on Wall Street, which was a very interesting world. And I left after a couple of years and worked at 23andMe. So I led corporate development there and worked to start our drug discovery arm along with some members of the team there. 23 was great. And when I left, I was trying to think of interesting ways that we could connect patients with drug development. And I met Onno. And we've been working together ever since. And yeah, it's been an amazing journey.
That's when your life started changing.
That's when life started.
That's when life started. That's when it started to become exciting.
Exactly.
So I'm Onno Faber. I came to the Bay Area about 4 years ago with a tech company that I started back in Europe. And during that time, I had been losing my hearing on the left side. And at some point during half a year after that started, the doctors made an MRI scan and found a tumor on the hearing nerve in the brain. So they told me you're going to lose that ear, at some point we might have to remove the tumor, but let's wait and see and make another scan half a year later. So they did that. Like half a year after that, they made another scan, and I remember very vividly that I had a call with the doctor early morning, San Francisco. The doctor was in Europe, so there was a big time difference, so it was very early for me. And he told me that the tumor grew, but I also had another tumor on my second hearing nerve. And he told me that I might have this rare disease called NF2 and that I should Google it. So then we kind of hung up, and it was a very scary moment. I remember being like totally alone in the house, like the only one up, and I did end up Googling it, and it turned out that patients can go deaf, blind, and paralyzed. So that is when my life started changing. It was about like 4 years ago. So I had some friends in the Bay Area that were working on genetics, and actually I'd been really interested in that, and talking about genetics with them for years before that. And we decided, let's sequence the tumor if it gets surgically removed. So I had a tumor surgery planned for later that year. And when we got the tissue, we got it sequenced, got the whole genome, so very high quality information, started to do our own research, found an interesting mutation that could indicate that I could benefit from a drug that was on the market for breast cancer. And when I learned that we found something that the research community wasn't necessarily aware of, to me that was a moment where I felt I can maybe do something useful for this disease, and I started to spend more time on it. And a bit later, I co-organized a research event called Hackathon with a local group in San Francisco called SVAI. They are a research community with people that can look at big amounts of genomic data that's in the computer. And we ended up having 300 people participate in the event. I opened my data up to them. And it was really a humbling thing to see the people spending 3 of their free days, weekends, trying to help and look for something useful in my data. The research community that was studying my disease also came over, so it was also a really nice mingling of people that knew how to use the computer and look at big amount of data. Google sponsored it, so we had all the computer power that we could wish for. And the only thing that bothered me that weekend was that my data was the only sample. And that turned out to be a very limiting factor. And I think this is when, I started thinking maybe we should find a way for patients to collect this data, corral it into one system, and sort of solve the regulatory and technical problems around that. And I think that's the time we met, Nancy, and we started doing research, like how can we speed up research in rare disease, and went from there.
Awesome. No, that's awesome. I'm curious, what did that research look like when you and Nancy first met and were sort of research, like you said, researching how rare disease, drug development works? What kinds of things did you run into? What did you learn?
So we were researching research. It's pretty meta. I think one thing that I was very fortunate about is that Nancy is really good at making phone calls and finding people. We literally had hundreds of phone calls in the first sort of half a year that we started working on this, and I think the phone calls were with people that were doing research in my particular rare disease, but also in other rare diseases. We talked to doctors, we talked to patients, we talked to people from the industry, pharmaceutical industry.
We visited hospitals.
Yeah. We went everywhere. And I think we had a lot of moments where we were really excited, let's do this, we are onto something. And then having a few more calls and then, this doesn't work. We have to learn more. And it's just it was a constant sort of iterative process on even finding out what we could do to systematically speed up rare disease research. And another thing, what I genuinely thought when I started, rare disease is this really small problem, is really hard, and nobody's interested in it. And I think you countered that very quickly.
Yeah, I was like, no, actually, from a pharma perspective and biotech perspective, it's like the next space. Everyone wants to get in, but nobody knows how, because there's just not enough data. People don't even understand what a condition is. What are the symptoms? When do patients undergo different procedures? So it's really hard for the industry to invest when you don't have all that information.
Right. Yeah, and it was that was for me an eye opener to kind of see and learn that rare disease is a really big problem. Later we learned that there are 7,000 rare diseases. They're all small individually, but if you pull them together, we are talking about a really big problem. And rare disease is actually very common, sort of counterintuitive. But I don't know, the estimates are that 1 in 10 people in the US and Europe have a rare disease.
30 million people in the US.
30 million, yeah. Yeah,
and a rare disease is classified as any condition where there's under 200,000 people in a country.
Right. So it's huge. And we thought what if we can build an infrastructure that really deals with the problems that are very specific to rare diseases. There are not a lot of patients, so we knew very quickly it's going to be about quality. You cannot make it about quantity because you don't have enough data. You will not have enough patients even if you have everyone. So it's going to be really important to create data sets that have a very high quality standard.
Mm-hmm. And the problem there is, unlike in common conditions like heart disease, where you have millions of patients and you have thousands of doctors and researchers and resources, each individual rare condition doesn't have all those resources. You have sometimes only 5 doctors or researchers in the world who know anything about the condition, and there's no infrastructure to collect this information. And so what we see is doctors, researchers, pharma companies, they will reinvent the wheel every time when they try to collect this information from hospitals. Sometimes they have to kind of start up 20 different hospitals in order to get data on just 20 patients. And remember, in rare disease, a clinical trial could have just 12 patients. And so it's not a large amount of information, but there's so much to be understood.
Right. And that also ties into the sort of like trying to avoid the double-blind studies, right, with a placebo.
Yeah. So sometimes in smaller conditions where maybe you only have 1,000 people with the condition, you don't want to subject half of the population or a third of the population that participates in a trial to a placebo. That's just unethical, and so the FDA thinks that is unethical. So how do you even measure against a baseline, right? Because if you're a drug company, you have to understand how a condition progresses naturally. It's called a natural history, in order to actually benchmark how your drug is doing. You have to measure against something to see if it actually works. So you need that information often from your medical records, what doctors will collect during routine clinical care. All of that is in this unstructured notes in your medical records, physician notes, progress notes. That is really important to capture, but nobody's capturing that systematically right now.
Right.
So how are you guys going about capturing, for example, that?
Yeah, so instead of going to the hospitals, what we wanted to do was empower patients to take control of their own information. We wanted them to really determine whether they wanted to participate in research and have their information be contributed to research. So in every condition, we have an opportunity for them to sign up in their condition. We always work with the top researchers and doctors in every condition because, of course, we're not the clinical experts in every condition, but they are. And patients can sign up online, tell us where their hospitals are, and consent to research if they want. And then we will go out and actually collect all of their medical records on their behalf. Because we actually started by asking patients to upload records, but we just saw that it was really difficult. And it's a very frustrating, confusing process. You have to fax in forms and call and nag. And so we just do that now on behalf of everyone. And so then we allow them to access this information privately and securely, and then what we're doing on the back end is we're actually extracting out really deep clinical information from these records so that all of that information is de-identified. So it doesn't contain their name or their phone number and things like that. And we want to share that very broadly with all researchers, whether it's a doctor, an academic researcher, and of course the industry, right? Because that's kind of the reason why we're here to accelerate drug development.
Yeah, that's right. Like I always felt like as a patient, I want 10 companies to work on my disease because another thing I learned along the way is how risky it is to develop treatments. You never really know if something's going to work out. Like sometimes the side effects are really bad and just not worth the trade-off. Sometimes it just doesn't work. It works maybe in an early study, but if you actually test in humans, it doesn't. There can also be other things like making a mistake in the trial design. There are so many reasons why like companies fail to get a drug on the market that you really want, as a patient, you want as many companies as possible to work on it because that's going to increase the odds that something good will come out.
Yeah, it's science. It's discovery.
Science is hard. Yeah.
Along those lines, Onno, can you, or both of you guys, can you talk a bit about the current state of this data and how it's shared or not shared, and sort of a little bit more in depth about the hurdles that you came across as you researched the research? Right.
So how the industry is doing this right now, right? Because
exactly. What are they now doing?
Yeah. Like that, yeah, that is an actual really big problem. Is the reason we exist is because getting this stuff the traditional way is really, really hard. It takes a lot of time. It bears a lot of risk, and you end up with sort of a data set that usually can't be reused by anyone else. So there is not really a central place to do this. The reason is like rare disease patients are like pretty spread over like the country and the world. They all go to different hospitals. So if you want to get this resource as a company, if you want to work on the disease and you need this data, you need to deal with all the different hospitals. And the hospitals are really limited by regulations. So they are not allowed to just give the records to the company, but they can do the same as we do. They can abstract the data out of it and give it, but it can take years and millions of dollars to do it. So for companies, this is a big risk. And it also doesn't help the research community. The data can't evolve, cannot grow. Those are all like one-time efforts. You need to know exactly upfront what you're looking for, what you're asking from those records. Go out to all the hospitals, make deals with them. And as a patient, you're just like a bystander. You're just not involved in that process at all. So I really felt that, we want to give this patients this opportunity to do it themselves. So patients are holding the key to their own records. So if we can get enough patients together to let us do this for them, let us collect the records on their behalf, and then we, together with the research community, organize that data, create the right data models, and abstract it, it is an entirely different solution.
Yeah, and what we're hoping is if we can proactively build this, not in response to a compound or a drug program that already exists, which we would love to help accelerate, but if we could do this proactively with patients and with these top researchers, we can actually jumpstart trials. And what I've learned from the industry is if you can help them de-risk some of this upfront research and understanding who are the patients, where are they, what this condition looks like, and you have expertise, then they'll actually take an interest in going after the condition because they may have a technology looking for a condition to go after.
That's right. Yeah, and I also felt like as a patient, as I was doing this research in the beginning with Nancy, I felt like I want an organization that does this on my behalf, an organization that is accountable to me. And it's really interesting because it's like nobody's fault, but the patients are really not having a very central place in this industry. And my dream was that if we can build an organization that is accountable to patients and thereby also wins over the trust of the patient community, we need to think about the impact of our work every day to patients because we rely on the community to buy into this. If patients are not signing up in our disease area, we can't do anything. They also get the option to opt out. So if they don't like what we're doing in the future, they can leave. So this is really, I think, accountability that needs to be built into the system is currently not there. And this is what we try to do, like in terms of moving patients from like bystanders to play a bigger role. And an individual patient doesn't have that power, but if you have enough, if you have a collective, if you have some diseases like 100, other diseases only 50 is already a quite good number. Then you can make a stance.
Yeah, absolutely. Nancy, I wanted to go back to something you said about rare disease being sort of the next space for pharma and biotech perspectives. I think that's really interesting, and I wanted to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. In just like the last less than 10 years, the cost of genetic sequencing has come down dramatically. 80% of rare diseases are genetically based, like NF2 is, for example. And because of this cost coming down, there's this boom of technology platforms like gene therapies, immunotherapies, CAR Ts, like, you name it. And they're all, there's so many more ideas out there and technologies. But once they hit phase 1, once they hit the clinic, when they're starting to test in humans, it's really hard because you don't understand what the disease is. So you can't create a program. You can't tell the FDA how you're going to measure your drug against the baseline, again, called natural history. And it's just really hard. But the FDA also has a lot of incentives for rare disease development. So, for example, there's higher prices, there's longer time you can market your drug, and of course, just shorter development timelines. So in some cases, there may not even be 3 phases of clinical trials. Sometimes you only need 5 patients, 12 patients for a trial. So the investment is actually much lower. And yeah, I mean, I think in the last couple of years, like half of all new approvals were rare disease drugs. So it's becoming a really exciting place.
Yeah, the other thing is, I think the other thing that gives can give patients hope is that there's a lot happening, like not only in IT, technology, computing, genetics, but also in like treatment technologies, right? Like it's really the beginning, right? The first gene therapies are coming to market, and there is a whole like world of possibilities for the future. I'm still worried, like as a patient, to use, especially in rare disease, use the limited resources we have like efficiently, because still like many ideas are likely to sort of fail later on. So we need to kind of use the limited resources that we have very wisely. But yes, things like gene therapies, immunotherapies, where you can re-engineer your own immune system to go after your tumors. It's really fascinating technologies that like were sort of unthinkable a few decades ago, and can be especially interesting for a lot of rare diseases.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of people will focus on the science, which is, of course, super important. And people kind of forget about the clinical, the medical record data piece of it. But that's such a blocker. Without that, you need that to start even thinking about a trial. And sometimes, we call it like we're working on the boring stuff. Everyone else is doing the shiny science stuff. But, we're doing science as well because we need that clinical information to actually move this forward. And it often gets forgotten.
Yeah, this is a really good point. Like, when I started with the hackathon, with the event, I felt like, genetics, we need a lot of genetic data in order to make sense of that. And that is still true. But, we found very quickly that the clinical data will be even more valuable as a starting point. But it is not as sexy. It is like a very hard and boring sort of problem to work on, but it's going to be so fundamental. And I hope we can communicate that also to the communities really well, like that this is a really important piece that we need. We need to understand the natural progression of the disease. We need to understand what we need to measure in the clinical trials. Like if we don't have those basics, it's just going to be really hard to do anything.
Yeah.
Then on top of it, later on we can do genetic sequencing and everything. But you need the clinical information first.
Yeah, imagine having 1,000 genetic sequences, but not knowing who they belong to, whether these patients even have a condition, whether they're patients,
right?
Much less dissecting into more detail. Maybe some people have a more severe version or a less severe version. It's useless.
Yeah.
So what keeps, I like that line that you're working on the boring stuff. And what keeps you guys working on the boring stuff day in and day out, when probably, especially now when you're kind of in your more nascent phase, it's probably feels like a thankless thing sometimes. What keeps you going?
We're making boring sexy.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah, I think the other thing is really, we just know how important it is. Like, it is worth it because even though it's boring, it's worth it because we know how important it is for the community. So, we are, we are really happy to sort of do it because we know that every patient that comes on, and when we work on the data models, it's going to help. And I think that is what drives us. So, again, like communicating this to the communities is really challenging. It took us almost a year to figure this out, all these phone calls, how important this work is. So we cannot expect anyone to understand that right away. But how do you communicate this to the community that, this is really important? And the other thing, like we always said, like developing therapies and accelerating the sort of path to therapies, that is our mission. But it can take so long, right? Like it's an unfortunate thing, but it can take years or even a decade, like before you have a therapy on the market. So we want to like stimulate that path. That's our mission, but we also want to bring a more short-term value to the community. So we are working with some of the researchers in each disease to just try to understand the disease better, which can of course help in the care. Like once we are publishing with them, you can hopefully make better decisions, in your path, but also give the individual patients access to all their medical records in an organized way. We already have this because we need to organize it for the research. So why not build a product and an app for patients that they can, have that information at their own disposal. So we really try to make use of it, like in the very long term, and midterm, but also in the short term.
Yeah, and I think maybe some people find it boring. We actually find it pretty exciting, and the researchers and doctors we work with are incredibly excited about the data. So we'll go through, a chunk of text, and sometimes we can't even read the handwriting, but we just go through it, and you just learn new things about the diseases with every single patient. And that's the thing in rare. Every single patient matters so much that you find new insights because there's just not that many patients. And so these researchers are, guiding us through that. We ask them a lot of questions, and we try to basically build this knowledge, but have it grow over time. So we keep the records updated over time. So it's not just one snapshot. It's since your diagnosis, even before, and every year thereafter. And in the future, we want to collect even prospective data, of course. So that's really exciting.
Great. So how has recruiting patients to get involved in RDMD been? Do you think patients recognize the values, both short, mid, and long-term values you just mentioned? Has it been more or less challenging than you thought it would be to get people to take an interest?
Yeah, it's sometimes different in different communities. I think patients have been very excited when they hear the story, and sometimes, we're always on the phone talking to patients in a bunch of different conditions. Some will have questions about, what is this research really? I don't understand, tell me. And we'll tell them, and they get really excited. And then they tell a bunch of other folks. Sometimes, it's a lot of education about what is a consent? What's a research consent? We want you to be informed about what you are contributing your information to and where it's going. Sometimes they have questions about drug companies and how we work with them. Do you de-identify my data? Yes, we remove your name, things like that. So there's a lot of questions, and we're trying to figure out a way to better communicate that to more people.
Yeah, and the other thing to note is we work with all the stakeholders in the community, right? Like we work with patients, but we also work with the people that do research in the condition. We work with the industry if we can, and we work with all the foundations that represent the patients as well. So we are really trying to be sort of the central hub for all of them. And we have we are doing something really useful for all stakeholders. So it's like a win-win-win. The researchers, they are very excited because this can potentially give them a much better data set to do research on for the disease and to understand the disease better. For foundations, it's great too. They have the same incentive. Some of them want to do research, others want to sort of help support the members, which we do as well. Like people get access to a whole medical record. Patients, of course, benefit. The industry benefits too. So everybody benefits, but it is such a new thing of going about this problem that we have to educate everybody about it, and that sometimes is challenging. But I think when we have enough time with people and when we can explain everything and answer all their questions, we are very transparent about everything. Like. We don't leave any question unanswered. Like, and if we don't have the answer, we are we are going back to work and find out what it is about. So we are very committed in solving the problem, and I think as soon as people see that, they get really excited, and it's exactly what we need. We rely on the community to embrace it. We rely on the foundations, on the researchers and the patients. They all need to see that this is something that benefits everyone.
Definitely. One thing that kind of strikes me from listening to this conversation and other conversations you and I have had, Onno, is that it seems, if we're to strip this down to sort of one problem you're solving, which obviously there isn't just one, but the problem it seems that you're approaching is not so much, the problem of rare disease, but rather the problem of rare disease data. Would you agree with that?
I mean, the data is first just a way to get there. We care about better treatments, going to the market faster. Right? We care about solving the actual problem that patients have. So data is just an important piece to speed it up. So we ended up working on the data problem because that is a blocker in getting the treatments out there. But the real problem we care about is getting a treatment to the market faster. This is the problem I personally have. Like, there is no FDA-approved therapy for my disease. This is actually the case for like 95% of rare diseases. There is no FDA-approved therapy. And that really sucks. Like, do we have to wait and sit around and hope that someone fixes it? No, like, you don't want that. Like, as a patient, you want to do what you can to help accelerate this and increase the chances for a treatment to be there. And some people, they collect money, they raise money, they start events, which is really great. That's really important. We are trying to solve the data problem in that whole circus. There is so much, you need so many different things to come together. But ultimately, the problem is there is no treatment, and we want to do what we can in order to get it there. And what we are doing is we are giving patients another thing they can do. Like, they are holding the key to their data, literally. The hospital has a way to abstract data, and this is the way the industry currently works. But patients have the right to get their data. So we help them get it out there, and we help the community to organize it and structure the whole thing, and then enable the researchers to work with it.
Yeah, and I would say, Onno's completely right? Like, rare is just fundamentally different from common diseases, and the model needs to just be different. You can't apply traditional ways of drug development to rare disease because it's just so fundamentally different. And when you think of ultimately precision medicine, everything is a rare disease. Everyone has some kind of rare condition. I probably have a rare condition. So how can you, on an individual level, be able to extract out insights? You can't do that in a very traditional way. So, we're solving the data problem. We're also solving just like a different model.
Yeah, this is a really good point. For example, my disease is called NF2, neurofibromatosis type 2. It's called type 2 because it's split up from another disease called neurofibromatosis. So there is a type 1 and a type 2. And it turned out at some point that those two things were completely different diseases. There is a third disease as well that got split up called schwannomatosis. So the community, like what was a pretty common disease before, maybe, like it now is a bunch of smaller diseases because we understand the genetics and we understand now that they are actually very different and they need to be treated very different as well. So this is a trend that you see happening because we have the technology to identify the diseases better. The amount of rare diseases is increasing, but still the structural problems in the industry to go after those rare diseases remain the same. And ultimately, as Nancy also said, like maybe me as an individual, I have NF2, but maybe I have certain characteristics that only apply to me. So that's where you get to precision medicine, right? And this is sort of like what we explored in the hackathon, right? Like
that's ultimate precision.
The ultimate precision medicine. It's just like, here's my data. What's the problem? And it was so crazy. Like there were 20 presentations, and the teams were like, yeah. Onno's tumor, we clustered it, like it doesn't look like anything else. Like people were like doing research on my data specifically, which is nice for me. But of course, like if you have a bigger data set, a bigger community, you see that all these data sets are slightly different. And like if we find a treatment that works well for all of us, great. But if there are, in theory, two treatments, one works better for one half of the NF2 population, the other one works better for the other half, of course, that is even better. So the trend of sort of splitting diseases up and branching them out, understanding them better, could be beneficial if we find a way to actually get treatments on the market for all of these subtypes, because they also get smaller and smaller over time. Yeah. It's fascinating.
Absolutely. I guess I would love to hear a little bit more about that question that I'm sure you get a lot from patients or family members of patients, which is like, okay, but what are you really doing with this data? You say, deep clinical data and abstracting and, these terms that we use a lot in Silicon Valley and maybe don't even always know what they mean here. And elsewhere, people definitely don't know. So, like, how do you respond to that question?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much, right? So when you think about a drug development program, you start with preclinical, where you're doing science, you're doing experiments with mice, perhaps, or different animals. You're really planning what your whole program will look like. And then you go to phase 1 and 2 and 3, and then even after you get your drug approved, you still need to show to the FDA that the drugs are doing what they intended to do. You have to submit information to, for example, insurance companies who will pay for that drug to say that, hey, we're actually doing what we promised to do with this drug. And so you need information from the medical records for that discovery development process. For example, if you want to understand how fast the progression of a tumor is, how fast it grows, you can really understand how well your drug is doing in relation to that baseline. There's no other way that you could properly design a trial that way. For example, another thing could be that you notice that patients who have blue eyes tend to respond to the drug faster. Okay, that's interesting. What part of patients that have blue eyes makes them more susceptible or less susceptible. And so perhaps you target your therapy or your drug just to patients who have blue eyes. So there's so many things that drug companies, academic researchers need to understand for research purposes. And then, of course, for clinical care, which is what we are, what doctors are still treating patients right now with, is you need standards for care. So one problem in rare disease is there are no standards. There's only 5 people, 5 top researchers who actually understand the condition. So when it comes up in the wild, you don't know what to do with it. So if we can set these clinical standards for care, that would bring a lot more benefit to people very much in the short term.
Right. Yeah, and like you have to imagine, like sometimes these records, they come in as like a pile of papers, like a pile, I don't know, half the height of a person. And it's, it's just papers at that point. Like the papers are useless. So the research data actually has nothing to do with those papers, but the papers are used because the information is in there. But we have an abstraction process, which means we go through the papers, we organize it, we sort it, and then we get specific elements out of the information. And those things that we get out of it, that is used by the researchers, not the papers themselves. So the papers themselves, they just function as our sort of backup and what's called an audit trail, because once you have the research, you say like, oh, patient XYZ has a hearing level of 80. You need to be able to like show where did you get that number from. So we would have like a reference to the original document, but the researchers will never work with the original document. That is only available to patients and to the people that need it for data abstraction. But it's crazy, like how these things are still sort of handled in papers and fax machines, and we still get faxes, right? But that we want to be the last station for the fax. Like, that is the final stop. From there on, like,
the fax stops here.
From there on, it's hopefully like good, like abstracted data. But again, like the papers are important because you do need to show where this data is coming from when asked by someone that regulates, and wants to know what the source is. So, but we do all of that, and it depends on the disease what we are getting from those papers, and in many diseases is even a bit of an unknown problem, like what is in the papers. Like not everybody has a clear idea because there is no access to it. It is the patients. Again, the patients are really key to it, because if enough patients are sharing that for research, we can take a look and like, oh, there is really interesting information in it, and work with like the real researchers that know the disease really well, and build a data model from there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's a pretty crazy process.
It sounds like it. I was just going to ask, can you tell me a little bit more about that abstraction process and how you guys even manage that? Because to me, it just sounds like kind of like you described, like just a nightmare of papers and like.
Yeah,
I don't even know how you go about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice because we digitize everything first, and so you're working with digital files that you can maneuver much easily. So we build a lot of technology around this to make it much easier. And at the end of the day, of course, we work with humans as well who can actually go in and do the actual extraction of that data. We'll always come up with, what our research question is, and then ways to answer it. We'll do some certain discovery, but we need to be able to do this because right now how it's done is industry. The drug companies have to rely on doctors who are at hospitals to do it themselves. And that's not what a doctor is supposed to do, right? Doctors are supposed to see patients, conduct research, do analysis. They shouldn't be doing the legwork behind extracting data out of papers. So we kind of view ourselves as doing that legwork, and we have people who we work with who actually do that legwork, and we supply them with the right technology and tools, and of course monitor the quality and the security of that information.
Yeah, it's actually a profession, right? A clinical data abstractor.
Oh yeah.
There are people that do that for a living.
Yeah, thousands of them, and these are all people with clinical backgrounds, nurses, people like that.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not super easy to explain the process, but I think, like on a high level, it's sort of a discovery process almost. Like some things are pretty well known, and we go in and we can get it. So for NF2, for example, hearing is an important measure for NF2 patients, because almost all NF2 patients have a tumor on both hearing nerves and lose their hearing at some point. So that is like an element we know we can extract from the hearing test, and it's important. But other things are less, less exact.
Black and white.
Less black and white. And we also have designed our product around that, like to be able to have an iterative process and find some more high-level information first and then dig deeper as we move along.
Absolutely. Let me think if I have any other questions for you guys. It's been awesome, and you guys have a really great tag team way of explaining things. It's really nice.
Yeah,
we spend too much time talking about this.
We are breathing all these things. Like one thing that's really interesting is, I went into the healthcare space knowing hardly anything about it, but just with the personal interest, and then at some point you just learn all these terms, but you forget how it is to not know it very quickly, and then data abstraction, of course, KOLs, which stands for key opinion leaders. Those are the doctors that know everything about a certain disease, and you use these terms as if everybody is supposed to know what they mean.
IRB was a new thing, an institutional review board. This is a board that will review your research protocol, like how we do abstraction, how we collect records, how we de-identify data, and say that it's ethical. Yes, they put their stamp of approval. So there's just so many things you work with. Yeah,
the industry is huge, and there are so many people that do work, and I think nobody can claim that they, especially in rare, that you fix something on your own. You can't. Nobody can fix this on their own. You need to work together, and especially in rare disease, it's extra important because you have limited amount of resources. So even this having enough patients to run a trial is hard. So if everybody starts to run their own trial and not coordinate, nobody might have enough patients to run their trial, right? And you all lose. So you have to work together, and foundations and doctors, patients, industry, everybody needs to work together more effectively in order to get something done in rare. So I don't know, who knows what this leads to, but I hope that what we do helps to improve the collaboration in the disease areas that we work in, and who knows where this goes. Maybe it's an example for more common diseases as well. They can learn from rare.
Amazing. I wanted to have you once more touch on the practical benefit of what the RDMD locker is, and kind of how special that is, because I think it doesn't get touched on as much when you guys are talking about things, just because, like you said, you're steeped in it and you're used to it, and you're like, well, yeah, of course we go and get all of your data, and
right,
in a very easy to access format for you, but that's not important. But it is important, and I want to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, this is true. Like, I encountered a problem myself in the beginning. I was just getting diagnosed. I was seeing one doctor after another, and I literally had to drag my information along from one doctor to the next because I was referred to another specialist before they figured out what I had. And even when I knew what I had to find like I wanted to find the best doctor for me. Like, where is this person? And you're talking to so many people, and you're constantly having to explain to them what your situation is. They all want to see your records, and it was incredibly difficult. And we hear that from all patients. Like, some people have no records on their own at home at all, but they usually feel anxious about not having it. Some people have half of it in a binder, and drag the binder along, which is really hard to manage and to share. If you have a physical binder with CDs, MRI scans, and you want to send it to a new doctor remotely, are you going to send your original CDs? So even like having all your records in one organized place where you can share that like easily with a new doctor, that could like already be very useful in your just making better decisions in your care, or having it in one place is really important. Everybody knows it. Like, as you go through, for example, for me, a surgery, you go to the surgeon. They need to access your records. But then you go into a clinical trial somewhere else, you would need to have that stuff in place and give it to them. So it is a very like hard to manage process, and we make it easier. We call it my timeline in the product. So it literally like lists out all your records, MRI scans, everything that we collect on your behalf is organized in the timeline. It helps. It helps.
There was that one time when we had a patient who wanted to send her files to another doctor for a second opinion, but there was like a 3-month delay because she had to first get her records, and then the doctor, that new second opinion doctor, had to request it, and they don't have time either. Right. And so it's kind of like this burden on both sides to do it. Crazy.
And you guys do all that for free?
Yeah, it's like it's like, no pun intended, side effect of our work. It's we want to do the research. We need to organize it, and it's relatively easy for us to create a product around it for patients where they can have everything in one place too. So it makes perfect sense for us to do this. Patients have benefited from it a lot.
Yeah, can you tell me any anecdotes about patients that have been able to use this?
Yeah, like in rare disease, like people do. Doctors are usually really like willing to help or look at your information. But it's, as Nancy explained, it's really hard for them to get all those records in place. So what usually happens, like either you have a phone call with the doctor without the records, which is not really ideal because the doctor cannot really say anything useful to you. Or you wait like for months before they get access to it, and for that one phone call, that is usually not even worth the effort. We had some patients that sent it to multiple doctors and had multiple conversations, and all these doctors know each other anyway. So it really can help them make a better decision, especially if you have an important decision coming up, like a surgery. You don't, at that point, want to think about collecting all your records to get a second opinion. You want to have it ready. And so people know this intuitively, so they want a binder. But if I have to, like after every MRI scan, if I have to go to the radiology department and to the medical records department from every hospital, every facility, every appointment, and put it back into my binder, it's taking so much effort. It's actually funny because I thought I was pretty good at it, and I was collecting all my records. But then at some point I decided to sign up again for on our own platform, and to my own surprise, we got a lot more information in the timeline that I didn't have, and I was like, oh.
Yeah. Well, usually when you're logging into your health portal or something, that's not nearly all the information. You don't get the doctor's notes, you don't get the progress notes, and that's the most useful information for research. That is where the meaty stuff is. That's where boring becomes sexy.
Right. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I think this has been a really good sort of arc of conversation. Do you guys have any things you feel like we didn't cover or that you'd like to add?
You mean our sleepless nights?
Yeah, tell me about those.
Yeah.
Actually, do tell me about a little bit more about your team and how, what it was like when you started, when it was basically just you two, and how it's grown.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm pretty amazed by how the team is growing, and we started was just the two of us, and we had this really small office, and we got help from an engineer who's now our head of engineering, and then at some point he joined the team, and then we raised funding for the company. Then we got another person on board to manage all the record requesting and operations because there were too many things going on. And, ever since the team has been growing, and we talk about culture a lot in our company. The mission is the most important thing. So literally everybody that joins our team is passionate about the mission and is the main reason why they join, because everybody knows this is not the easiest thing to work on. Like, everybody in the team can have easier jobs somewhere else. So they're just really here because they care and they want to work on a really important problem and help people. And I'm really humbled by this, and I'm really proud of everybody that joined so far.
Yeah, I remember when Onno and I were talking about this over a year and a half ago. He said something like, "Yeah, I just want to make rare disease interesting. Making it interesting and exciting to work on rare diseases." And that's what we're doing with the team and everyone around the team, not only just the people working at RDMD, but our investors, our advisors, our partners, our pharma partners, foundation partners, doctors. Everyone is just, you can just see from talking to them in one discussion that they're so passionate and mission driven, and that it's really about the patients at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, I also felt like I just wanted to spend, it started with me just wanting to spend time on it, and I've started things before, so I know I know how to start something. But in the beginning, I just didn't really know what this was going to be. I just knew I wanted to work on the problem. And, then at some point the hackathon happened. And then I thought, am I going to do this in the weekends on my own? And I quickly realized, the healthcare is too complex. There are too many disciplines involved. It has to be something more serious if it has to have a real impact and be sustainable over time. And that's when I realized, I'm surrounded by talented people here in San Francisco. It is my job to make rare disease exciting to work on and attract the talent to work on this problem. That's not only going to benefit me and not only going to benefit the patients that have my condition, but potentially patients in any rare condition.
That's great. And I guess my last question is about the momentum of attracting, patients to do this. And After listening to you guys for even 10 minutes, I am completely convinced. But what are you guys doing to build trust in the patient communities?
So that's a very good question. I think first of all, like, we try to be very transparent about what we do. Like, we realize that in order to do this, we need to win trust from the community and maintain trust over time. So I think the core of it is that we have a very authentic mission. Like, there is no bullshit.
Can you say that word?
There is no bullshit. Yeah, like, it comes from our hearts. So I think that's where it starts, because that is going to affect everything we do. But there is a lot to explain, so we have to figure out, like, what do we have to explain first. We have to educate people that are active in their community and educate them about what we do. So we spend a lot of time with the first patients in a new condition, with the foundations in a new condition, with the doctors. We really, like, spend a lot of time to talk about what we do and how we go about things. They have a lot of questions, so we answer them all. And again, if there is anything that we didn't cover yet, we go back to the drawing board and figure it out. Like, a lot of things haven't been figured out in a structural way. There are a lot of, like, initiatives that are out there, good initiatives that figure something out, but usually it doesn't span multiple rare disease areas. So I think we are trying to build an infrastructure that can be used for any rare disease area. So we take a problem and look at it as an opportunity to fix something. Like, every time we hit a roadblock, we try to see, like, what is the structural problem here that we can solve. And this is how we go about things. And I think also ultimately how we win trust, because we show it that we are doing it.
I just wanted to ask one more question. I know I said that was my last, but
yeah, right.
Can you just, can you just tell me which diseases you guys are working in now and how many?
Yeah.
And how that progress has gone?
Yeah, definitely. Like, Nancy is the only one that can pronounce all the diseases. So I'll let her take this question.
Yeah, so we're working in a number, and the number is growing, and for some of them we're still learning, and so the list continues to grow. And we're always kind of interested in what our next condition is, because I think if enough patients are interested, we will absolutely work on it. So we're, of course, in NF2, NF1, schwannomatosis, which is where we got started from in NF2. We're also in IBM, inclusion body myositis. We're in CIDP, which is chronic inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy. We're in MMA, which is methylmalonic acidemia. We're working in Sanfilippo, A and B, and a couple of others right now, immune thrombocytopenia. So the list is growing, and we're learning a lot because every condition is very different.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes the conditions have subtypes too. So we, yeah.
And do you find that you often have patients requesting that you expand to new diseases?
Yeah, we get a lot of emails from patients all over the world, actually. Just kind of asking about what we're working on. It just shows how common rare is. Every time I tell someone what we work on, it's just in a dinner discussion, somebody will say, "Oh, I have a friend who has a child who has this rare condition," or my wife. So it's really common, and people often don't really know where to turn to.
Yeah, and every disease we work on, we need a certain amount of patience in it in order to really start the work and build the data models out. So, every disease we work on, we try to kind of get to a minimum size very quickly. And usually, like, the first patients are really involved in growing the first the first community, because people are sort of unfamiliar with it and unfamiliar with the system and the way we do things. So it's really a matter of like the community picking it up, and it's actually what it's how it should be, I think.
And do you use to interact with these communities? What type? Are you guys on Facebook? Do you tweet? How do you find these communities and these people?
All of the above. A lot of patients are on Facebook. There's groups where they'll talk and join. So what we typically do is we always work with an ambassador in diseases and tell them about what we do so that they can then introduce that to their community. So we're always looking for ambassadors and trying to educate through them, and through them also learn a lot about the condition and learn the differences and what is needed from the community and from patients.
Yeah, every disease is different. So we really work with the first patients and the first doctors that come on board, also to learn about what are the challenges in this particular disease, and kind of bring it back to the product we are building and the platform we are building, because we want to not compromise on the quality of our work. So it's not like, we make like a cookie cutter platform for all rare diseases. We actually look deeply into the disease, and we don't want to compromise on data because we have a standard way of doing things. So we tailor, built a platform in a way that we can tailor it and tailor the effort to each rare disease.
Great. Okay, I'm actually done. I think I could keep talking to you guys for hours. Let's go. But I think this is a really awesome start, and really, you guys are passionate and well spoken, and it's a pleasure to interview you.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for being on this, and thank you, Nancy, for working on rare disease every day.
Yeah, no.
And changing your life.
Yeah, no, it's been amazing.